If we had to pick the most powerful weapon in all of anime, we would undoubtedly say the Death Note. Forget all the laser guns and mecha suits because this simple notebook is a literal manifestation of death. All you need to do is scribble your enemy's name and victory is basically guaranteed. Thus, in this marvelous video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the various death notes that we've seen in the series, and we'll also be discussing the various users who have managed to get their hands on these deadly notebooks over the year. Get ready and grab your pens and potato chips because here we go. Sidoh's Death Note. Let's start with the death note that started it all, the one that was actually used by Light Yagami to wreak havoc across the world. This death note originally belonged to a Shinigami known as Sidoh, but was stolen by everyone's favorite apple connoisseur, Ryuk. Ryuk added instructions on the use of the death note and dropped it into the human world because, well, he was just incredibly bored. The death note changes hands multiple times across the story. It appears to be a fairly normal notebook with the words Death Note scribbled on the cover and ruled white pages inside. The notebook seems to read from left to right, and it contains a series of 5 rules that explain its usage. The scheming manipulator Light would actually even add some rules to the original 5 in order to mislead L. As the story progressed, Light gave up the Death Note in order to mislead the authorities, and Rem gave it to Kyosuke Higuchi. When Higuchi was killed, Light became the owner of the Death Note yet again, but the notebook remained under the watchful eye of the Japanese task force. Later in the series, Soichiro Yagami traded the Death Note with the mafia after Seira was abducted. Jack Neylon ends up getting his hands on the deadly notebook, but he's never actually its owner. The Death Note found its way back to Sidoh after it was recovered from the mafia and returned to the Shinigami realm. Jealous's Death Note. This is the second Death Note to be revealed in the series, and it originally belonged to a Shinigami named Jealous. But Jealous falls in love with Misa Amane and ends up using his notebook to kill the man who's destined to kill Misa. As a result, he passed away, leaving the Death Note in Misa's care. However, the book was repossessed by Rem, who later carried it to the human world and gave it to Misa. Misa gave up ownership of this notebook in favor of Light when she was detained by the task force. As Light led both Ryuk and Rem to possess each other's notebooks, Ryuk was tied to this notebook for the rest of the series. When Misa was finally released, Light sent her to the notebook again so that she could have her memories back. Misa kept using this notebook for the next 5 years, taking out numerous criminals on Light's orders. After the time skips, Light pressures Misa into giving up the notebook as he supposedly wants her to become a normal wife. He would then send Jealous's notebook to Teru Mikami, who sent some pages of the book to Kiyomi Takada while keeping the rest of it in a safety deposit box at his bank. Teru would continue sending Takada names and faces of criminals while publicly using a fake notebook. The book would eventually be discovered and confiscated by Stephen Giovanni. It was nearly burned by Nier, after which it was never seen in the human world. Rem's Death Note. Rem's Death Note was the third Death Note to be revealed in the series, and it remained on the Shinigami's person until her death. She used it to protect Watari and L, which also led to her demise. The notebook was then left behind as property of the human world. Light eventually managed to get his hands on the notebook and kept it for a number of years. Eventually, Light gave the notebook back to Ryuk in order to make him the Shinigami attached to the Death Note. This was also the notebook that Light gave to the task force to be used against the mafia. Soichiro would become the owner of this notebook during the raid and even took the Shinigami eyes to deal with Ryuk. Over the course of the series, this notebook would be used by Rem, Light, and Soichiro. Ryuk's Death Note. This Death Note is carried by Ryuk throughout the series and is one of the few books that hasn't been used by any other character. In appearance, it's pretty similar to the one used by Sidoh and even has the word Death Note scrawled on its cover. When Ryuk first met Light, he warned the high schooler that when it was his time to die, Ryuk would be writing his name in his own Death Note. This prediction eventually came true, and in both the manga and the anime, this notebook became the reason for Light's demise. Midora's second Death Note. Midora is a Shinigami who became so obsessed with Ryuk's adventures in the human world that she developed the desire to go there herself. She obtained a second Death Note by bribing the Shinigami king with human apples and dropped her second Death Note in Japan. It was obtained by an unnamed human who later assumed the role of Kira. However, this guy was more interested in many killings than killing humans. This human, known as Sea Kira, was tackled down by Nier and wrote their own name into the Death Note. When Midora returned to the Shinigami realm with the notebook, she handed it to Ryuk. For 4 years, Ryuk looked for a suitable human and chose a guy named Minoru Tanaka, leading the Akira storyline. The ultimate fate of this notebook is still unknown, so you better keep your eyes peeled for any black notebooks lying around. Users. Sidoh. Sidoh was the original owner of the Death Note before Ryuk took it for a ride. By the time the poor guy realized that his Death Note was missing, the thing had already caused great amounts of chaos in the human world. Sidoh is depicted as a rather repulsive being with heavy clothing that obscures most of his features. His mouth looks like a canary's beak, and his arms look like the appendages of an insect. Sidoh is extremely fond of chocolate, which is actually a trait that he shares with Mello. He's a highly determined fellow when he sets his mind on something, but he can be intimidated easily. Sidoh didn't really play a major role in the main series, but he was seen hounding Ryuk repeatedly for the return of his notebook. He also passed out flyers to other Shinigami, but of course this was in vain. When he finally tracked down his notebook, it was already in the hands of the mafia. Thus, Sidoh agreed to join Mello's gang against Nier's SPK and the Japanese task force. When Light finally gained the Death Note yet again, he was forced to return it to Sidoh in order to keep the Shinigami from interfering. This also helped Yagami gain the trust of the rest of the task force. Despite his brief appearance, Sidoh was actually pretty integral to Light's downfall, as he was the one who revealed the nature of the fake rules to Nier. Ryuk! Ryuk, the apple-munching Shinigami, is actually the one who kickstarted the whole thing. Imagine being so bored that you hand humans a literal instrument of death. It's like giving an ant a rocket launcher. A lot of people ended up dying, but at least it killed his boredom. Ryuk is actually pretty different from the rest of the Shinigami in their realm, as he doesn't want to simply pass the time. He also finds humans like Light extremely interesting and is genuinely impressed by the humans' experiment with the Death Note. Despite this, he doesn't actually care whether Light lives or dies and functions just as a spectator, never intervening in the story directly. He will often withhold important information from Light, as most of his actions are motivated purely by the desire to see something fun. Though he's a highly intelligent being, Ryuk's desires make him somewhat predictable, and this increases Light's ability to manipulate him. Ryuk's fondness for human apples is well known, and this is partly due to the fact that Shinigami apples basically taste like sand. Ryuk's addiction to the fruit has reached such a point that he genuinely suffers from withdrawal when the fruits are kept away from him for extended periods of time. He's also noticeably awkward around girls, and I guess we can relate to him there. He also exhibits a liking for video games and comics, even asking Light to join him on multiple occasions throughout the series. Ryuk is a tall, humanoid Shinigami who's extremely thin. He also has light gray skin, spiky blue hair, blue-gray lips, and sharp teeth. His limbs are also way too long for his body, and his large yellow eyes are marked with bright red irises. He flies using two large retractable wings that protrude from his back. Light Yagami! Light is by far the most infamous user of Sidoh's Death Note. He serves as the main protagonist of the series and was the first to discover the Death Note after Ryuk threw it into the human world. He decided to use his newfound power to rid the world of criminals and evil men, but, well, what's that saying? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Light ends up becoming a true menace to society after he takes up the mantle of Kira and begins destroying every single person that he deems evil. Light is far beyond your average high school student and might genuinely be one of the most manipulative characters in all of anime. He started out as something of a natural genius due to his academic talent and likable personality. Light's greatest talent, however, is his skill at planning, as he's extremely adept at mapping out scenarios in his mind. Due to his innate talents, Light received constant adoration from the people around him, and this might just be the main reason behind his hubris and arrogance later in the series. Just like his father, Soichiro, Light has a strong desire to bring about justice, and his worldview becomes increasingly twisted after he gains the power of the Death Note. He believes this world to be rotten, and thus he begins using the Death Note to rid society of evil people under the guise of Kira. As Kira, this brilliant high school student seeks to bring about a new world that's free of injustice and is filled with honest people, but as we all know, lofty goals like these are never attainable, and he soon becomes corrupted by his power, and he begins seeing himself as a god. Eventually, Light showed us a cold and repulsive side of himself, which was nothing more than a ruthless killer. He's not averse to using even the most extreme of measures in order to bring about his vision of a just world. Honestly, the guy was even willing to put his own sister, Seiyu, in danger in order to increase his chances of victory. Light isn't remorseless though, and exhibits genuine compassion once he gives up the notebook and loses his memories as part of his plan. In a strange and twisted way, Light also has a unique bond with his arch nemesis, L, even though their views on justice are completely opposed. Light serves as a cautionary tale that warns us of dark places that power can lead us. Rem! Rem is the Shinigami who was responsible for providing Misa Amane with a Death Note. Rem is one of the few Shinigami in history to have fallen in love with a human, but she ended up turning to dust as a result. Unlike Ryuk, Rem has no special interest in humans and views them with a sense of contempt. Due to Rem's fondness for Misa, she can be easily manipulated using Misa as leverage. She also tends to partake directly in Misa and Light's schemes. After Jealous sacrificed his life to save Misa, Rem delivered the fallen Shinigami's death note to her and began looking over the human to keep her from harm. She even told Misa about the one thing that could kill a Shinigami, have them kill in order to save someone they favor. Though Rem was always aware that Light was using Misa as a tool, she could hardly do anything as Misa was deeply in love with the protagonist. When Light declared that he would kill Misa if she didn't follow his orders, Rem declared that she would murder Light if he harmed her in any way. When Misa began following Light against Rem's orders, Light began taking advantage of Rem's desire to save Misa by killing L. When Misa is eventually caught by the task force, Rem convinces her to forfeit ownership of the notebook, even though the former begs Rem to kill her. Rem would later confront Light and threaten to kill him. Instead, Light asks Rem to erase his memories and hand the notebook over to someone greedy and immoral. Rem handed the notebook to Kyosuke Higuchi and grew to detest him to the point that she started admiring Light. Rem was also the one who actually penned down what Watari and L's names in the Death Note, leading to the dynamic duo's unfortunate demise. This would lead to Rem's own destruction, as the Shinigami aren't allowed to kill humans just to save someone they favor. Kyosuke Higuchi. Kyosuke, the head of technology development at Yotsuba Corporation, was one of the 8 core members of the Yotsuba group. He is eventually revealed as the third Kira after receiving the notebook from Rem. Kyosuke was chosen by Rem for his greedy and selfish persona and would use its power to attain a higher status in society. He's initially instructed by Rem to carry out a series of routine killings of criminals, after which he could use the notebook however he pleases. He begins holding weekly meetings with the rest of the Yotsuba to discuss the killing of their competitors to maintain their dominance in business. Though the group realized that one of them was Kira, they were not aware that it was Higuchi. Rem would eventually aid in Higuchi's capture by using a piece of his death note to allow Misa to see Rem. Following this, Misa revealed her admiration for Higuchi and manipulated him into confessing his identity as the third Kira. Unbeknownst to Kyosuke, Misa actually recorded their entire conversation and ended up sharing the tape with the Japanese task force. Higuchi was also betrayed by his fellow members of the Yotsuba group, who had grown uncomfortable about the escalating number of deaths. In order to evade the police, Kyosuke took the deal for Shinigami eyes, but was thwarted by a police blockade set up by Aizawa. Though Higuchi tried to kill himself before the authorities could get to him, Watari knocked the gun out of his hand. The poor guy was finally killed by Light using a scrap of the death note that he had hidden away in his watch. Jack Neylon. Jack was a member of the mafia who gained access to Sidoh's death note after his gang forcibly obtained it from the JTF. Neylon is a raging drug addict, and his colleagues actually thought he was high when he panicked after seeing Sidoh for the first time. He's a low-ranking mobster who works under Rod Ross and is heavily involved in drug and arms trafficking. He's been arrested 4 times in the past, but somehow always finds his way out due to a lack of evidence against him. When the mafia, led by Ross and Mello, extracted the death note from the JTF, it ended up in the hands of Neylon. Sidoh eventually tracks his notebook down to the mafia's hideout, where he reveals the secret of the Shinigami eyes to Neylon. Mello ordered Neylon to take the trade, but was forced to give up half of his lifespan under pressure from Ross, who also offered Neylon a top job in the mob. Eventually, Misa, who had already gained the Shinigami eyes, identified Neylon to the authorities, and soon a U.S. Army Special Forces raid was conducted at the hideout, despite Neylon's attempts to save himself. Light had already predetermined the time of his death at 23:59 in November of 2009, and thus Neylon was eliminated. Roy! When the raid on the Mafia hideout was conducted, Roy and Skyer were the only 2 survivors. Roy tried to fend off the police by claiming ownership of the Death Note, but unfortunately, the building collapsed, ending his life. Soichiro Yagami. Soichiro Yagami is one of the most notable characters in the entire series as Light's father and the first leader of the JTF. A kind family man with an unwavering sense of justice, he also has a strong sense of responsibility and duty, which is why he continued the investigation for Kira even after the police stopped funding his task force. Soichiro is often away from home due to the nature of his job. His personal motto is justice first and family later, which is something that Light later adopted in his own life. Throughout the Kira investigation, Soichiro was a firm believer in the fact that his son was innocent. He went as far as to kidnap Light and his girlfriend Misa. He then put them in a situation where Light would have no choice but to kill his own father if he was Kira. L's accusations against Light are a huge challenge for Soichiro, and thus he allows L to go so far as planting surveillance cameras in his own household. When Soichiro's daughter Seiyu is kidnapped kidnapped by the mafia, he finds himself choosing between the duties of an officer and the duties of a parent. He eventually gives in to his parental emotions and exchanges the Death Note with the mafia. During the raid on the mafia hideout, Soichiro agreed to use the Death Note and even took the Shinigami eye deal. This helped him learn Mello's name during a standoff, but the officer was gravely wounded by a bomb just moments later. Though Light tried to have his father write Mello's name on the notebook, Soichiro quietly passed away. In his final moments, he ends up seeing Light's lifespan, which proves to him that Light is innocent. However, the poor officer was unaware that Light did have a Death Note on him, but hadn't attained ownership of it. Ryuk revealed that Soichiro died a happy man as he was sure that his son was not Kira. Well, at least someone had a happy ending. Jealous! Jealous is a doll-like Shinigami who seems as if he was poorly sewn together from mismatched patches of fabric. His skin is blue in color, while some patches are white. He has stitches crossing his entire body with a set of small wings protruding from his back. Jealous is an anomaly among the Shinigami as he seems to care deeply about humans. He's incredibly kind and possesses a genuine desire to help people. Rem recalls that Jealous would watch over Misa when she was young, but on the last day of her life, Jealous used his Death Note to intervene and kill Misa's destined murderer. As a result, the poor Shinigami was reduced to a pile of glitter and his Death Note was left behind. Rem would eventually hand it over to Misa, as it was she whom Jealous had died saving. Misa Amane! Misa is a great example of how misleading appearances can be. This outgoing and childlike individual is actually highly afflicted by the trauma of seeing her parents murdered right before her eyes. She's clearly struggling from these brutal experiences and went through a deep depression when the murderer was acquitted of the crime. But, well, the criminal was eventually killed by Kira, and this makes Misa eternally grateful to the latter. She's absolutely obsessed with everything about Kira and worships the mysterious killer like a hero. Due to this fascination, she would eventually take up the mantle of the second Kira. After discovering that Kira was actually Light, Misa becomes even more attached to him, and almost all of her actions are motivated by her single-minded devotion to him. Due to her impulsive nature, she's often reckless and can even be considered idiotic by condescending douchebags like Light, but she's displayed a surprising amount of intellect at times, like when she successfully tricked Kyosuke Higuchi into revealing his identity as the third Kira. Her innate carelessness is actually what led her to prison, as she mailed the Kira tapes herself and even failed to remove fingerprints and DNA evidence from the envelopes. Though Misa seems to be a really nice person when you first encounter her, she can be pretty psychotic and cruel at times. She declared that she would actually murder any girl that Light dated, even though that she knew these poor girls were just part of Yagami's plan to mislead the investigators. Despite these flaws, she's extremely loyal to Light and will go to any extent to safeguard his interests. Misa is considered to be highly attractive by those around her, and she works as an actress in the film industry. She's a short, slender young woman with a penchant for gothic and punk fashion. Teru Mikami. Mikami is a young criminal prosecutor who was chosen by Light as the hand of Kira. He ended up taking ownership of Jealous's death after Light fell under the suspicion of being Kira again. Mikami is an earnest prosecutor with a strong sense of justice that is developed through his childhood experiences. He absolutely detests crime in all forms and displays an almost fanatical passion for punishing evil. This has led him to develop a rather black and white understanding of the world, which we all know is pretty unrealistic. The guy tends to label everyone he meets as either good or evil, which makes him really annoying to be around. Much like Misa, Mikami shows a single-minded devotion towards Kira and considers him a god. Mikami's childhood experiences with bullies also taught him that he must always work towards improving society, and thus he has a disdain for people he considers lazy. He supports the elimination of everyone who's not an active contributor to society. He also shows a special interest in encouraging children to become model citizens. Just like Light, Mikami is fiercely devoted to his view of an ideal world and isn't averse to taking innocent lives for the greater purpose. His devotion towards this goal is so great that he sacrificed half his lifespan to gain the Shinigami eyes without any hesitation whatsoever. Mikami might just be the one guy who's even more insane than Light, as he even supports the elimination of people with past criminal records, even if they don't commit crimes anymore. Unlike Light, who's more committed to preventing crime, Mikami's sole purpose as the owner of the Death Note is retribution. He's a strict disciplinarian and follows the same routine every day. It's evident that the guy is mentally unstable, as one can hear him mutter the word delete every time he writes names in the notebook. When he lost his faith in Kira, Mikami's insanity escalated to such an extent that he killed himself in prison. However, some characters like Matsuda have expressed that this might have just been the result of Nier writing Mikami's name in the Death Note, and I guess we'll never know for sure. Midora. Midora is a Shinigami who resembles a salamander with a long tail. She's light green in color with dark spots on her head, dark yellow eyes, and a large crooked smile. It's said that she's rather well known in the Shinigami realm because of her size and tail. She also sprouts a couple of reptilian wings from her back. Midora is clearly not as serious as Rem, but is also far more reliable than Sidoh. During her time on Earth, she developed a fondness for bananas, which is pretty in line with her salamander-like appearance. Seira. Seira is by far the most unique of all the humans that have used the Death Note in the series. Instead of criminals, Seira only kills the elderly who wish to die. They also seem to have taken the deal for the Shinigami eyes. Despite this guy isn't much of a threat as he lacks will and committed suicide after Nier said that the Seira was an abominable murderer. Officially, Seira is the 5th Kira in the series. Minoru Tanaka. Minoru is a young man who was chosen by Ryuk due to his great intelligence and problem-solving skills. Minoru was the first person who could get Nier to admit defeat after the latter found himself unable to track the guy down. However, Minoru doesn't have an obsession with justice like Light and is opposed to using Death Note himself. However, he's not averse to making the Death Note available to anyone who wants to use it if they pay the right price. Minoru's intelligence can be gauged from the fact that he was able to devise a plan to sell the Death Note even after security was heightened due to the advancements in technology. Minoru has no qualms about his clients using the notebooks for immoral stuff, as he openly claimed that he doesn't really care. Minoru's actions created the most positive economic influence among all the Kiras, even though this wasn't his original plan. After the economy boomed in the country, the event became known as the Kira Bubble, and Japan's citizens began to revere Kira as a god once again. Marvelous verdict! Well, this list proves that the Death Note is genuinely a weapon of mass destruction in the wrong hands, and somehow these notebooks have never really found their way to the right hands. But honestly, that's what makes the show so much damn fun to watch. Since every character is so unpredictable, it's impossible to not be along for the ride. That's all we got for you this time, but do let us know which of these Death Note users is your favorite in the comments down below. Maybe we'll follow up with a feature video on them. But for now, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all our most marvelous content, and thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.